Good evening. We are probably, I say probably because who knows, probably going to finish up our introduction to the prophets this evening. I know some of you all may be thinking I got my slides wrong because I was last week, but I was told that I went through Zachariah way too fast last week, and people weren't able to get information down, so we're going to reiterate. I'm not going to necessarily slow down with it, because I do want to make sure that we get through what we're getting through there, and then the last two that we will have for this week, because I really think that we should be able to finish up with the last of the minor prophets. And then I think what I'm going to do after that is go back and talk about the post-exilic history books, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and we'll briefly cover those, and then I'm going to go into an introduction to the wisdom literature. And then after we do that, we will have basically covered the Old Testament at that point. So we'll then have some discussion about what's called intertestamental period, or the Second Temple period, and we'll figure out exactly what we're doing from there, but I would imagine we'll probably at least do some kind of New Testament introduction as well. So, but that is to be determined, and still is kind of up in the air exactly what that's going to look like. All right, so as we just kind of get into Zechariah again, let me just kind of talk about this again, just very briefly. You can date this to the 2nd to 4th year of Darius. If you look in Zechariah chapter 1 and verse 1, in the 8th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zachariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Iddo. And then go over to chapter 7, verse 1. In the 4th year of the king of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah on the 4th day of the 9th month. So we have some dating markers here by which we know when Darius began his reign, 522 after Cambyses, and this is the type of stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit as far as the different kings and how they all squared away. But we know he took the throne in 522, so this gives us some good markers for dating Zechariah. We know he was a contemporary. I still didn't fix it, even after I made this mistake and talked about it last week and then ignored it. He was a contemporary, not with Zechariah, but with Haggai. And they're mentioned in Ezra chapter 5 and chapter 6. So we know that they were there together. We also know that Zechariah was a priest. He is mentioned as such in Nehemiah chapter 12 and verse 16. So referencing with Nehemiah chapter 12, we know that Zechariah was a priest, and he also becomes the most important of the post-exilic prophets. You have Haggai just kind of is sent with a mission to do a certain thing. Zechariah kind of serves as more closely to one of the major prophets who has more that he's doing, more that he is saying. So, looking at an outline, just very briefly, let me just put all of it up here. You can break down Zechariah into two parts. Chapters 1 through 8 would be the first section. Chapters 9 through 14 would be the second section. And each of those two parts breaks down into two parts. So chapters 1 through 6, it's a series of what's called night visions that he has. And then you have chapters 7 and 8, some information discussion about how they're supposed to do the fast. And then with that, it gets into talking about how God is going to be there to help them their role in obedience, and then it gets into talking about the fast, their fasting again. So you see that discussion there in chapters 7 and 8. In part 2, the focus turns outward, judgment on the enemies, starting in chapter 9. And this is highly poetic, starting there, going through into chapter 11. And then chapter 12 through 14, it's a focus on the coming kingdom and the king himself. All right, so that's kind of a breakdown then of the outline. And then here's some key themes that you'll find from Zechariah. We talked about the idea of the former prophets and how that gets mentioned. And you see this from the very beginning, chapter 1 and verse 4. Chapter 1, verse 4, "Do not be like your ancestors. The earlier prophets proclaimed to them, 'This is what the Lord of armies,' or the Lord of hosts, says. 'Turn from your evil ways and your evil deeds,' but they did not listen or pay attention to me." This is the Lord's declaration. This is an important theme. You see it there in chapter 1, also chapter 7, verse 7 and verse 12 of chapter 7, where he talks about how God sent prophets to the people in former times. And how did they respond? Not well, right? Did they say, "Oh, God has a message. Oh, we've messed up. Oh, let's repent and let's turn and let's do everything the way we're supposed to"? No, in former times, the former prophets, when they sent out, they did not listen, they did not change. And Zechariah is like, you realize your history, right? Let's not repeat it. We've had the whole 70-year thing, the captivity, all of that. Let's move forward. Don't be like your fathers. And then another theme, the kingdom of God. And it's not like that it uses necessarily that terminology, but we see pictures, a depiction of the king. I think we talked about from last week, chapter 9, where it talks about the king who comes in riding on the donkey in a humble way. That's the picture that we find talking about Jesus with the triumphant entry as he comes on the donkey. This is where that comes from. And you see, with the help that's going to be given to the nations, to the nation of Israel, a lot of it's going to revolve around the kingdom of God. All right. So, y'all feel better about Zechariah than you did as I rushed through it last week to try to get it in before the bell. All right, John? You got a mic coming to you. So, all right.
Former prophets, would that be post Moses or pre Moses, or around David's time, post David, or all three?
Well,
could it include Adam through Moses, all the prophets that were there? Like Noah was referred to as a prophet of God, and they didn't listen to him either.
Yeah, I think it's more practical than it is specific, just in general. But you look at, like, say, chapter 7. Let's see here. It says, "Aren't these the words that the Lord proclaimed through the earlier prophets when Jerusalem was inhabited and secure, along with its surrounding cities, when the southern region and the Judean foothills were inhabited?" And the word, let's go down to verse 12. And it says, "They made their hearts like rock, so as not to obey the law or the words that the Lord of armies had sent by his Spirit through the earlier prophets. Therefore intense anger came from the Lord of armies. Just as he called, they would not listen. So when they called, I would not listen, says the Lord of armies. And I scattered them with the windstorm over all the nations that had not known them. The land was left desolate behind them. To say, is this referring to any specific, I think would deviate from what he's trying to say. He's just trying to say, God sent prophets, they didn't listen, they went into captivity, is really the idea. So, if it fits that picture, sure. I would say that would work.
I wonder if Zachariah had a sense of the earlier prophets.
I would assume so. They seem to have a decent recognition of their history, especially during this time. They're familiar with the king's accounts, which I believe by this point in time have been completed. I don't think the Chronicles accounts have necessarily been completed by now. I think they're still in the future. But they would have known their history, and they would have known why it is that they ended up in captivity. And he would have been familiar, I think, with prophets such as Ezekiel and Daniel and Jeremiah, and the other ones that aren't too terribly far away. All right, very good. Any questions? Thank you, John. Any other questions concerning Zechariah? All right. So this brings us then to our final two prophets, Joel and Malachi. So let's start with Joel. All right, who can give me a rough date for Joel? Where does he slot in? Anybody? All right, well, here's basically the best answer that we have. Who knows? We don't have any dating mechanism for this. There have been people who have dated this to be one of the earliest of all of the minor prophets. In fact, I think someone, maybe even, it might have been Dave, when we were talking about which ones were the earliest, and he threw Joel out as a possibility. And it might be. Some of them put him as far as one of the very last of the prophets, perhaps the very last one. I don't go that far to that extreme, but I think that there are some reasons as to why I slot him about right here. And in this time period, he is post-exilic, so he's after the exile. And there's some reasons. First of all, he never names a king. And so it seems as if there's no king that's actually sitting on the throne. He never mentions idolatry. That was a problem that a lot of the pre-exilic prophets talked about idolatry. At the same time, he really doesn't mention any real sins, necessarily problems. And so to say, well, he doesn't mention idolatry, so that must not have been a problem, maybe that might be a little overstated. It doesn't work all on its own. But he doesn't seem like one of those earlier prophets that was trying to turn the hearts of the people back because they had messed things up. He seems to talk, if you go to Joel, and by the way, another reason why some people date Joel earlier is because he's earlier in the scroll. Remember, all of the minor prophets were put on one scroll. They called it the 12. And so on the scroll of the minor prophets, he's his place is early, which is an indication that some people take it as an indication that he was at least considered to be an earlier prophet. They don't technically go chronologically, but there's just kind of a general feel to it that way. But in Joel chapter 3, if you go to Joel and you look at some of the things that are mentioned here, starting verse 1, in those days and at that time when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem, I will gather all the nations, take them to the valley of Jehoshaphat. I will enter in judgment with them there because of my people, my inheritance. the nations have scattered the Israelites into foreign countries. They've divided up my land. They cast lots for my people. They bartered a boy for a prostitute, sold a girl for a wine to drink. This seems to be language that sounds like the exile has already happened. This is what they did. They scattered the peoples and they used them, abused them. But does God ever talk about future events in the present or in the past in other places? He does. So again, all by itself, this doesn't necessarily, it's not conclusive, absolutely. He could just simply be saying, in the future, when they do this, this is how I will react, and speaks of it in using that tense. He mentions in chapter 3 and verse 6, you sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks to remove them far from their own territory. Now this is interesting because this is really the first time that we see Jerusalem or Judah coming into contact with the Greeks and really having any mention or discussion there other than future events that you kind of have to figure out exactly what's talking about, like in Daniel or such. And so we know that the Greeks are going to be a later thing that's coming up, which makes it sound like maybe this is a later writing. However, he's writing to Tyre and Sidon, the territories of Philistia, and we know that they, being on the Mediterranean, they did have contact with the Greeks. They did, in their sailing and trade and things such as that. So it's, again, it's not conclusive. It's not this is definitely an indication. So all of this to say, I think it's later. Bullock, if you remember, Bullock dates this anywhere between 444 and 345. That is, 444 would be the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. 345 is the destruction of Sidon by Artaxerxes. And I would put this in the 444 category. I would put Joel around the same time as Ezra, Nehemiah, and in that time frame. That's where I place it. But again, who knows? He doesn't give us timestamps, and maybe that's an indication of something. John Calvin says this about him: as there is no certainty, it is better to leave the time in which he taught undecided. And, as we shall see, this is of no great importance. The import of his doctrine is evident, though his time be obscure and uncertain. So, all of that to say, does it really matter? Because Joel is not discussing time-sensitive issues. He's not relaying things that are pertinent to the people that very specific there. He is really focused heavily on future events. And it's important that we, I think, see that so that we will understand it's just not as big of a deal. All right, so let's talk about Joel the man. We may not know much about the time of his writing, but do we know a lot about him as an individual? Look. No. All right. We know he's the son of a guy named Pethuel, but that name doesn't show up anywhere else. So here's basically what we know about him as an individual. Who knows? We don't really know much. He's probably not a priest because he speaks about priests separate from himself. He's probably not a leader of the people because he speaks of the leaders as if he is not one of them. So we don't have enough information. So let's go ahead and look at an outline then. Again, another minor prophet that breaks down into two sections. First of all, chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 17. is a lament. And so it really begins in the very beginning with an introduction. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. Hear this, you elders. Listen, you inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell your children about it. Let your children tell their children, the next generation. And then he starts talking about what it is that's taken place. What the devouring locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust has left, the young locust has eaten. And what the young locust has left, the destroying locust has eaten. So you have then a whole discussion, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, about the swarm of locusts. By the way, is that a thing out here? I really don't even know. No, okay. Because it's kind of crazy to be in the midst of locust swarms, and anyway, and it's really loud too. And I don't even know if the locusts that they have in the Midwest are the same things that they have in, over in the Middle East, if that's a one-to-one comparison, or if it's not, whatever the case. I just know what we went through, I think a couple times, because it's not all the time. They only come in certain sections, like in intervals of like 12 to 19 years or something like that they'll go underground and they'll come out. And anyway, it is crazy, and they wreak a lot of destruction when they come out. So you see that as a sign, or at least a vision of what is to come. And so we're going to talk about exactly what that is. But then you also see, starting in verse 18, chapter 2, verse 18, it says, Then the Lord became jealous for his land and spared his people. The Lord answered his people, Look, I'm about to send you grain, new wine, fresh oil. You will be satiated with them. I will no longer make you a disgrace among the nations. And so you see in verses 18 through 32, he responds to a repentance that is given in the beginning, that at the end of chapter 2, there's a call, as part of the lament, there's a call for repentance. And when Judah does indeed repent, as Joel calls them to do so, then there is the response of God in this section. And then it finishes with the contrast between the blessings that God will give upon repentant Judah, his people who have repented, and then the judgment that's going to come on the nations who are not his and do not repent. So this is your basic outline for Joel. And again, it's not a very long book and breaks down in this way. So let's talk about some key themes then. There are a few of these to discuss. Key themes, important passages. First of all, as we mentioned just a moment ago, the plague of locusts. And this is in chapter 1, it talks about the locusts, but then it moves as you go into chapter 2 into talking about a what? Well, it begins as a swarm of locusts, but then you get into chapter 2, and what is coming? What's that? Yeah, the armies, the locusts. The plague of locusts is kind of a sign, or it's a metaphor, just simply using the idea of locusts to describe the armies that are coming, and the dangers that are going to come from the invading armies. By the way, this is why some people date it earlier, because it sounds like he may be referring to those who come in and take them into captivity. This also, though, looks like an eschatological picture as you read through this. Big word, what is eschatological again? Just blurt it out. All right, relating to the end times. We talked about it in our high school class this morning. So that was all we did. We spent the entire time defining the word eschatological, so I wanted to make sure that no, it's not all we did. But yeah, very good. So we talked about the word eschatological, and that is relating to the end times. And so anytime that you hear people talking about things that are going to happen, those future events, and misappropriating things from Revelation or from the prophets and saying, oh, this is all about what happens there at the very end, that is what they are talking about. Eschatological themes, or things that have to do with the end times. And a lot of this has that feel to it. All right, so let's see here. Chapter 2, and starting verse 12. Even now, this is the Lord's declaration. Turn to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, mourning. Tear your hearts, not just your clothes, and return to the Lord your God. For he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love, and he relents from sending disaster. Who knows? He may turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, so you can offer grain and wine to the Lord your God. So what is God calling them to do? Okay, to offer the grain to him, absolutely, the grain, the new wine, and that is going to be the result. But what is he asking them to do? Okay, that's what I'm looking for, Joshua. Very good. That's exactly right. Repent and turn. Return to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, mourning. And then I think you get Joel's commentary as Joel comes in here. And he says, look, what that means, don't just give an outward demonstration by tearing your clothing. You really need to tear what? Tear your heart. Good job, Joshua. Yeah. You were listening very well. Tear your heart, not just your clothes. Because what passage does he begin to quote here? All right, Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7. By the way, have we seen that come up a few times? Like a lot through the prophets? And we're not even touching on all the times it comes up in the Psalms. This is a really important passage. And I think it's vitally important that we recognize the writers of the Old Testament, the prophets, everybody, they turn to this passage. And it's not like Exodus 34 is just something that God says, hey, remember Exodus 34. But you have, like right here, I think this is Joel saying this. And Jonah says, I knew that you were this way. And others, that this Exodus 34, 6 and 7, that's in the forefront of their minds. They think this about God. And so in this section, he says, look, God is gracious. He's compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in faithful love. He relents from sending disaster. This is, by the way, one of the most complete quotations of Exodus 34 that you're going to find. And then you have this verse 14, this statement, which is why I think this is Joel's commentary. What does he say? Who knows if? Now, once again, that has a tendency to crop up in these types of situations, doesn't it? When someone has to make a change, make a declaration, who knows if? You found it in Jonah, right? Isn't that what the king says? Who knows if this God might relent? Esther shows up in the book of Esther as well. Who knows? And we may talk about this. Anyway, we'll save that. There's a who knows there, and who knows in various places, but it's right here as well. Who knows? It's not necessarily a promise, but if you know enough about God and the way that God acts, if you do this, then what? All right, you can have an expectation that this is what God is going to do. Does that make sense? You know, it's not a definite, but he says, look, follow the pattern. You see the pattern repeated again and again and again. Knowing this about God, who knows? This could be what happens. All right. The next key theme I want to bring out is the day of the Lord. This is a big one. We've seen this one in a whole lot of the prophets, right? Usually the day of the Lord is talking about what? Judgment. Typically speaking, the day of the Lord is a reference to God coming in judgment. Here, as you see it in Joel, it creates kind of a pattern of judgment that is supposed to be a picture of how judgment works, not just for Judah or Israel, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, not just for Judah here, but across the board. This is just the way that God works. And so it gives here, as you look through and you see God's judgment that's going to be given, the way that he comes, the day of the Lord, and all of that, this serves to understand how the pattern works. All right, and then this one is going to as well, I think, be pertinent to our class from this morning. Probably the most famous section from Joel is the Spirit being poured out. Where do you find someone talking about the Spirit being poured out from Joel? All right, Acts chapter 2. Why? What's going on in Acts chapter 2? You guys can't answer.
Day of Pentecost.
Okay, the day of Pentecost. Why? What's happening, though? What happens on the day of Pentecost? All right, so you have the Spirit comes down, and the apostles are speaking languages they've never studied before, right? Languages they'd never learned. And here they are. They're able to speak these other languages. Crazy, right? It's an amazing picture to the point where you have these guys speaking other languages, and people are like, man, these guys are drunk. And Peter's like, no, guys, seriously, it's only 9 o'clock. Here's what's really going on. Remember what Joel said in Joel chapter 2, that the Spirit of the Lord was going to be poured out. And this is what's quoted in Joel chapter 2. And I'm going to start verse 28. After this, I will pour out my Spirit on all humanity. Then your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will have dreams. Your young men will see visions. I will pour out my Spirit on the male and female slaves in those days. I will display wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood, fire, columns of smoke. The sun turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, for there will be an escape for those on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem. As the Lord promised, among the survivors the Lord calls. So, in Acts chapter 2, we have a list here of all of the things that happen, right? In Acts chapter 2, we see sons and daughters prophesying, and old men dreaming visions, young men seeing visions, wonders, blood, fire, columns of smoke. The sun turned to darkness in Acts 2, and the moon turned to blood, right? This gives us a list of everything that happens in Acts 2, right? Wait, did some of that not happen in Acts 2? I heard yes and no from the same mouth, so she covered her basis on that one. She definitely had the right answer. Yeah, well, but Peter says that this is the fulfillment of Acts chapter 2. So if those things don't happen in Acts chapter 2, then how could that be the fulfillment? What do you think? Again, you guys aren't allowed to answer. Sorry. Maddie, you can if you wanted to. You don't want to, but okay. I'm just saying, you weren't in the class, when we discussed it. What's that?
Not, it says it's fulfilled, so do you have to list everything if you say they're all fulfilled?
Okay, help me understand what you mean by that.
If in Acts 2 they're saying they're all fulfilled, but we don't see every item listed, does it have to be listed if he says they're fulfilled?
By that, do you mean that they happened, but he just didn't list it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a possibility. Kelly?
Some of this stuff happened when Jesus was crucified. So maybe when he says that, it was the end of this group of things
Okay,
that
so you're saying some of these things that...
happened before Acts 2.
All right.
And it's fulfilled now. This prophecy is done.
Okay,
And watch out, because after this comes the great and terrible day of the Lord.
okay. So it was a compounding of events that culminated in this moment where you get the final ones fulfilled? Did I say that accurately from what you were saying? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, Dale?
Maybe he's saying that there's going to be a spectacular, miraculous event like you've never seen before. It's going to be from God, and those that turn to God will be saved.
Okay, but what about all of the line items that he mentions?
Well, I think I'm just guessing here that each individual thing is not really the issue. It's the day, it's the Spirit of the Lord coming down in this event that is going to draw people to God.
Yeah, I think Dale's got it exactly right. That's how you look at prophetic statements, at prophecy, and these types of visions. When you start to try to figure out a line-to-line completion, fulfillment of each individual thing, you're going to be left with all kinds of gaping holes of things that never get fulfilled, because that's not the way it's supposed to be. He's presenting a picture of something amazing, something that would get your attention and let you know the world is never going to be the same again from what it is. And he says it's going to be a different picture from this point on. And so in Acts chapter 2, the Spirit gets poured out. In Acts chapter 2, what does that look like? Yeah, the tongues of fire, but practically speaking. What? Yeah, what are they doing?
Converting souls.
They're speaking in tongues, right? Yeah. In Acts chapter 2, the fulfillment is people speaking in tongues. I mean, that's the Holy Spirit has come upon them. Now, is that the only thing that the Holy Spirit is going to guide them and allow them to do? No, the gifts of the Holy Spirit are numerous. There's all kinds of things that come with it. But the manifestation of Acts chapter 2 that equates, as Peter's saying, is the speaking of tongues that is a clear demonstration the Spirit of God is now on us in a way that the Spirit of God has never come on anybody before Jesus. We are experiencing something that the world has never seen before. And you are witnessing it right here. And that would be akin to somebody watching the sun go dark and the moon turning to blood and columns of fire and smoke and blood and all of those other things that are listed. It's that kind of a dramatic event that's taking place. But practically speaking, the fulfillment comes in the manifestation of these spiritual gifts. That's the way that we understand and we read prophecy. And if we get bent out of shape trying to find, well, hold on a second, I need to find an old man somewhere who has a vision. Where do I find an old man somewhere who dreamed a dream? I don't know. Mike and Dale and all, they're probably getting tired of me making all of these old man jokes. So I'm going to leave them out of it tonight, and I'm not going to bring them into this discussion. So I'm not going to ask Mike or Dale or some of those others if they've recently had dreams to fulfill this. But otherwise, do you have to wait around to check every box? And by the way, when you start doing that, that's what leads to you saying, hey, this hasn't been fulfilled, this hasn't been fulfilled, this hasn't been fulfilled, this hasn't been fulfilled. We're still waiting for those. And then you start organizing and creating this whole system of doctrine and teaching and understanding that is based on a misreading of the prophets, so that now you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs waiting for certain things to happen that the scriptures themselves are saying, yeah, that's already been fulfilled. That's already been done if you read it and you think of it the way that it was intended to be read. And there are, by the way, a lot of people who are still waiting for certain fulfillments or certain promises to be fulfilled that I think are clearly fulfilled with the church and in Scripture. All right, so this is the idea, the Spirit being poured out. By the way, who else quotes this besides Peter in Acts 2? I thought maybe it might be fresh in some of y'all's minds. Well, Isaiah and Ezekiel both, I think, predate Joel. Zachariah, you're going to be getting closer, but no, New Testament passage. Who in the New Testament quotes this section? Paul. In what? Romans. Yeah, I thought maybe some of y'all still had Romans on your mind. You're like, dude, we'd switch to Psalms. What are you talking about? Of course not, right? Yeah, but Paul in Romans. All who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. This is where that comes from, and this is where it's talking about and the Spirit being poured out so that God has brought election to his people so that those who come to him in repentance, as it's talked about through here, will be saved. All right, I spent a lot more time on that than I intended to, believe it or not. I got on a soapbox and, that happens. So let's talk about Malachi. This one we might have an interesting discussion in, because it'll be the first time that I'm going to at least a certain very familiar passage of Malachi and say maybe the translation's not very good. Typically I would date Malachi to around 460 to 433. Later, generally speaking, probably myself closer to 433. The time of Ezra and Nehemiah and towards the end of that time period, though there are some good arguments to be made. I believe this is one of the very final books, not only in the canonical order that we have, but the chronological order. That's why I date it as late as I do, around 433. I think Chronicles and Malachi are going to vie for which one is the oldest. And when you look at who is Malachi, what do we know about him? Not a lot. Yeah. In fact, some people suggest Malachi is not even a name. The word Malachi actually shows up in Malachi chapter 3 and verse 1. Anybody know where it is in chapter 3 and verse 1? Yeah, my messenger. The possessive of messenger. My messenger, you would say, my messenger is Malachi. So the name of the book is just simply my messenger. So some people theorize, and I don't have any problem saying that's his name. Malachi was a name, but some say maybe it's just a generic term for my messenger. And he wasn't even necessarily a real prophet, type of person to begin with. So, anyway, it's not that important, though, who he is. And some of that same thing flows through here. Okay. Malachi, you have 6 problems that he addresses. And these are rebukes on them for the way that they deal with love, honor, faithfulness, justice, repentance, the way that they serve God. And so you have these rebukes in chapters 1 through really chapter 4 and verse 3 as he talks to them about all of these things. And then there's just this little, and this is why I believe Malachi is probably in our canonical order, it's the very last book of the Old Testament, because it ends with this phrase, remember the instruction of Moses, my servant, the statutes and ordinances I commanded him at Horeb for all of Israel. And look, I'm going to send you the prophet Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. So, this is your outline where he ends with a very future-looking message that's focused on Moses and Elijah. So, we'll talk about them in just a second. Here's some key themes. First of all, faithfulness. And faithfulness to whom? All right, God is one of them. Who else? Spouse, your wife, right? Faithfulness to your wife. Chapter 2, verse 13. This is another thing you do. You are covering the Lord's altar with tears, weeping, groaning, because he no longer respects your offerings or receives them gladly. And you ask, why? Because even though the Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, you have acted treacherously against her. She was your marriage partner and your wife by covenant. Didn't God make them one and give them a portion of spirit? What is the one seeking? Godly offspring. So watch yourselves carefully so that no one acts treacherously against the wife of his youth. Now, the CSB, which is what I'm using, Christian Standard Bible, I actually didn't consult this. I think they get it right. In the way that they are going to translate this next bit. For most of your translations, what's the next thing that it says? All right, for I hate divorce, declares the Lord, right? And what's there is not, I hate divorce. It's not a first person, it's a third person. He hates divorce is actually what's there. And there's very, very strong reason to translate this differently. And like I said, I'm just now reading this from the CSB, and I think they get this right. If he hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord, the God of Israel, then he covers his garment with injustice, says the Lord of armies. Therefore, watch yourselves carefully and do not act treacherously. This is not God saying, I hate divorce. This is God saying, if a person treats his wife with hatred and divorces her. Putting those two, treating her with hatred is divorcing her or sending her away, then he has covered his own garment with injustice or violence, is how that could be read there. So, probably better he who I can't say that. He who hates his wife. And that's too many sounds there. He who hates and sends away his wife covers his garment with wrong or violence. And I think that is the best way to read this. By the way, do we need Malachi 2 to tell us that God hates divorce? No. Where can we go to see what God thinks about that? Jesus, yeah. What about Genesis chapter 2? Is divorce a part of God's plan for marriage? No, it's not at all. And that's where Jesus goes, right? When Jesus talks about this and goes back and says, should you divorce your wife for any reason? He's like, look, what God joined together, let no man separate. End of story, right? That's his response. So, we don't need this to say God hates divorce for us to understand that God hates divorce. We don't need a proof text passage for that concept. So we're not losing anything. Nothing changes here, but I think that this is a better way that the person who divorces his wife demonstrates that he hates her. And who's he really hurting? Himself. It comes back on him. He brings violence upon his own garment. All right, so the problem here, if you tie in some with Nehemiah and such, probably these are individuals who are leaving the wives of their youth and they are joining to Gentile, it's probably not the right term, the pagan, that's what I'm looking for, the pagan women that are an issue that you find in Nehemiah. So God is saying that by doing so, they're bringing judgment upon themselves. All right. Now, we also, someone said, I think it was Joshua who said this a minute ago, they're being unfaithful to God as well. This is demonstrated in what? How they were doing what? Okay, worship in particular, what action? That's Malachi's famous for. Not necessarily sacrificing. They're tithing, right? They're tithing. What were they tithing? They're lame, the worst ones, the ones that they could do without. They were bringing in the least that they had to offer. And in chapter 3, verse 8, it says, will a man rob God? You're robbing me. How do we rob you, you ask? By not making the payments of the tenth and the contributions. You're suffering under a curse. And yet you, the whole nation, you are still robbing me. Bring the full tenth into the storehouse so there may be food in my house. Test me in this way, says the Lord of armies. See if I will not open the floodgates of heaven and pour out a blessing for you without measure. Does this sound familiar? Do you all remember this passage where he says, test me in this? Bring the full amount of tithe and see if I don't make things overflow for you, right? Which for us, what does that mean? The more money that you give to the church, the more money God's going to put in your own pocket, right? Yes. This is how this passage is often taught in various places, in which, the whole tithe means what you give to the church and what you put in the collection plate or the box or contribute or whatever. And the more that you give, the more that God's going to take it and press it down and shake it and stir it until it overflows and all of that. And then you will be even more abundantly blessed. It's like a return on investment. It's almost like a retirement plan, that the more that you give to the church, the more you're going to get back from God. By the way, that doesn't work. retirement plan. I've sat across the table with enough people who were mad at God because God doesn't do what he promised to do. Sorry, Ryan, I can't. I'm done with comments for the night. We're up against time. God does not do what he says he's going to do because I give, and all it's doing is making me poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. And that's because they're trusting in promises that God did not give to them. This is a promise to the nation of Israel in their time with what they're doing that says, hey, you're not doing what you're supposed to do properly, and I have withheld. By the way, we talked about this last week. I know I said no more comments, and then I asked a question. What was it supposed to look like when they returned? You remember that from Deuteronomy 30? What was it supposed to look like? Amazing, more plentiful than what they had before. And it's as if God is saying, guys, can't you see that it's not here, that what I promised to you has not come about? Aren't you wondering why that is? Yeah, it's because y'all are not honoring me. Now, with us, maybe there are some principles here. It's not a matter of how much money you give to the church. I hope you all know, you didn't hear me say that earlier, right? I mean, I might have said it, but I hope that the sarcasm was dripping, and most people, maybe not everybody, but most people caught that. Yeah, that's not the way that it's supposed to be. Feel like Macedonians who first gave themselves to God. And then anything that they gave, whether it's money, time, focus, or whatever, anything else that's actually given is first given themselves to God. That's what God wants from us, our entire lives as a holy and living and holy sacrifice, right? That's what we bring to God, and that has to be wholly and fully. All right, like I said, I'm running out of time, but that's okay because we don't have too much more to cover. The day of the Lord, I'm not going to talk about this because this is very common throughout. We've seen this over and over and over, but I just want to make sure we see this stress. But what about Moses and Elijah? Moses and Elijah at the very end. Do we see Moses and Elijah come up together? The Mount of Transfiguration, right? Are they not both there on the mountain with God? That'll be a sermon at some point, I'm sure, talking about that. But in chapter 4 through 6, what did the disciples ask Jesus? If you want to go look at Matthew chapter 17, verse 10, when they're on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they come down, and Jesus is like, hey guys, just keep this between us. Don't go around telling people about this. And they're blown away by his saying that. And what do they ask him? Did anybody go over there? Matthew 17, verse 10. Yeah, Jeff? Yeah, just read it.
Asked him, why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?
Yeah. So, what is he referencing? That Elijah must come first. What's he what are they talking about? They're not talking about John the Baptist. They're talking about this passage right here. They're talking about what Malachi said, that Elijah was going to come first, that Moses and Elijah would be there. And what have they just seen? There's Elijah. They just saw him. And they're like, this is Malachi. This is it. This is what the scribes have been talking about. We just witnessed it. This is amazing. We have to tell everyone that it's finally happened, that he's shown up, Malachi's promise is fulfilled, and it's time. And then as they're walking down, Jesus is like, oh, yeah, by the way, guys, don't say anything about this. Can you see how weird that would have been? And they'd be like, what do you mean? Isn't this the fulfillment of what the scribes talk about, that Elijah must come first? Didn't we just witness? Don't we have to tell people? And that's when Jesus tells them, oh, no. This actually isn't that fulfillment. What was that fulfillment? Brian, you said it earlier, didn't you? Weren't you the one that said it? Yeah, that fulfillment, Jesus says, was John the Baptist. He's like, Elijah came, and they did not treat him nicely. Their chance is already over. They already missed that wagon completely. The hearts of the fathers being returned to the children, the hearts of the children being returned to their fathers. Did it work? No. And what's God going to do? The day of the Lord is coming. And did it for them? In AD 70, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, is the result of their lack of listening to the final prophets that God gave to them. John the Baptist and Jesus. They were the last of the Old Testament style of prophets who came calling to repentance and giving a warning of destruction. And both of them, they treated like they treated the prophets of old, persecuted them, killed them, and faced the day of the Lord. None of this actually helped. So can you see this pattern and this picture? And yet, the Transfiguration shows us there is still hope for hearts to be turned from the fathers to the children to the fathers, because there's a greater picture that's shown on the Mount of Transfiguration and beyond, Jesus. Listen to him. All right, I rushed that a little bit, but that's okay. We're a little bit over time. Thank you very much. I hope that the run through the prophets was helpful and kind of what you were anticipating and hoping for. And we will get back to looking the run through the text next week. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll turn it over to Richard.